Hey everybody, welcome to my at-home studio. You'll notice that I'm outside, so you have to pardon some of the construction noise. It sounds like it's a busy day in the neighborhood here. Today we're going to get into some different hand building techniques. We're going to start out with some going through pinch pots. So we'll start with basic forms. I'll show you some different ideas of projects that I'm going to try to produce here with you, and hopefully you can take these techniques and expand them in the direction that you're interested in. Today I want to show you 4 basic pinch pot shapes that you can form. If you're able to make these basic forms, then you can start to combine them and work on creating some other types of shapes from those basic shapes. So let's get started. I've got a fairly large chunk of clay here, and I'm going to start by cutting that down. I'm going to use the homemade wire loop tool that I made here. Not loop tool, wire tool. And I'll just cut this into fourths. These are going to be fairly small pots, but that's okay for our initial explorations here. Each one you're going to want to pound into a ball to start, and then we're going to put 3 of these aside for later use. Make sure that you wrap them in plastic so they don't dry out on you. Now I know, you've probably made a pinch pot before, you were probably in kindergarten, and your parents probably used it for a paperclip jar. That's the most basic. We're going to start a little bit beyond that, and by the end of this, I think you'll see that you can make a wide variety of shapes using very few tools other than your 2 hands. So, starting from this ball shape, I like to hold it in my non-dominant hand, in my case my left, and I'll take my thumb on my right hand and start to push it into the center of this ball of clay, turning the ball of clay as I go. So gradual pushing down until I start to feel the pressure of my right thumb in the palm of my left hand, and I am starting to feel that now. There's a slight bump up here that's also indicating that I've gone far enough. This is probably leaving a wall thickness that's about a 1/4 inch on the bottom, and it should look something like this. At this point, what you want to do is, with your thumb on the interior and your fingers on the exterior of your right hand, you're going to pinch with your fingertips and thumb tips, and then turn the clay slightly, pinch again, turn slightly, pinch again, and just repeat this all the way around the bottom shape of the pot. Once you make a full revolution, you should be able to feel the thickness of the clay, and part of what we're doing here is starting to train your fingers to sense the thickness of the clay, since you can't see that thickness without cutting it in half. Once you've made your way all the way around, what you're going to do next is shift your fingers up slightly and just work your way up the wall of the pot. This is fairly even pressure from both the inside thumb and the outside fingers. And when I work my way around again, I'll continue pinching up the wall of the pot. I'm reversing direction. I don't know that that's absolutely necessary, just changing it up for some variety. And I'm going to continue pinching up that wall until my wall thickness is even from top to bottom. What you don't want to do at this point is don't pinch the top too thin. And all we're really looking to do at this stage, my right hand's getting a little fatigued, so I'm switching over to my left. All we're looking to do at this stage is create wall thickness and shape. You will not be able to change the shape much later, because the next time we come to this, it will be leather hard. So we're going to let this dry out a little bit. But here's kind of what we're looking at. Okay, this is a basic bowl shape pinch pot. The characteristics are that it has a flaring opening, so the floor of the pot is narrower than the opening. And this is sort of if you're not paying attention really to what you're doing, this is generally the shape that you're going to get. Some of the other shapes that we're going to try and do next are to create a pinch pot that's more cylindrical shape. So we're going to try to see if we can make just a tube shape out of this. After that, we'll try and do a conical shape where the base is wider than the top. And then after that, we'll do one where it's a fairly wide open bowl or plate. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next chunk of clay. Same routine to start. You want to pound it into a ball. The better job you do at making this a ball to begin with, the more consistent your results are going to be. We are making fairly symmetrical shapes at this point. Again, this is kind of the basics. It is not crucial, though, that you make symmetrical shapes. A lot of interesting art is asymmetrical, and I think many things in life are slightly asymmetrical as well. So depending on what your final result that you're looking for is, you may choose to go off of symmetry. Okay, so non-dominant hand. Again, I'm starting with my thumb. So same basic beginning. Just going to turn, push. This should be a gradual force. When you get down to the bottom, again, my hole is fairly centered. This will result in a pretty symmetrical pot. If you were looking for asymmetry, you could try and leave more clay on one side or the other. Okay, in order to make this cylindrical shape that I'm working at here, what I'm going to have to do is put my thumb on the interior, fingers on the exterior, but the fingers of my right hand here are going to slide up the wall of the pot. So I'm dragging the clay upwards along my thumb. Still fairly gradual shaping here, and you do want to flare out that bottom corner just a little bit. So my interior thumb is pushing out slightly. Okay, and then just going to keep working my fingers up the wall. And you can kind of see how the clay is stretching in the direction my fingers are moving. Okay, so by the feel of this, I have a little bit of extra thickness on that inside bottom corner. So I'm going to push that out with my thumb from the interior. My fingers aren't doing much except receiving the clay in this case. Can push down on the floor. I'm able to do that with my thumb because I can bend it like this, which is fairly unusual. I think it's called a hitchhiker's thumb. If you can't do that, don't worry. You can use fingertips or thumb tip as well, trying to keep that floor fairly smooth. And then you can continue pulling the clay in an upward direction. Fairly straight. The clay does have a tendency to widen out, and the reason for that is when you're pinching it, you're making the clay take up a larger space. And so to combat that a little bit, you're going to have to squeeze your hands together, and it may create some creases on that top edge, but we can just smooth those out. Okay, so I'm not really going to do too much refinement on this, just trying to kind of clean up some of those puckered edges on the lip. Some of that you'll want to deal with now, just so you don't wind up with a crack later, but it's not crucial that these pots look very refined at this stage. Again, all we're trying to do is create the basic shapes, and then I'll show you some refining techniques in future videos. So we've got our cylinder. Now if you're clever or paying attention as you're trying to do this and you have a goal in mind, it may be possible that you could make these so that they start to match, so that the base of this one is the width of the one above it, or below it rather. Okay, on to the next one, the conical shape. This is probably the most difficult shape to create, but let's have a go at it. So we have the hole drilled in the center. The floor is a nice thickness. At this stage, I'm going to place this one down on the work surface, and I'm going to use my thumb on the interior to push the clay out to the corner. My fingers rather, are going to receive that clay on the outer edge. My left hand isn't going to be doing much except rotating the piece as I go. This should be gradual changes. You don't want to make any quick changes, and that's pretty much true for any kind of making, including throwing. So the base of this is getting fairly wide and pretty thin as well. You may wind up with a little bit of clay, extra thickness on the interior center, and I'm just going to push that out with my thumb again. In order to make this pinch pot, it's going to be pretty crucial that you've got a work surface that will release the clay. I'm working on drywall here. Canvas would also work, as would an old pillowcase, piece of fabric, cardboard, or some of the other options that I talked about in the setting up your home studio. Okay, so at this stage, I'm just looking at the shape from the outside for areas that may need to come out a little bit. It looks fairly even. Got maybe a little bit of a thin spot over here, but I think it'll be okay. What you're going to do now is the same technique that you used for the straight-sided cylinder. So you're going to pull the clay up your thumb with your fingers. makes this one challenging again is that as you're pinching the wall of the pot, the clay is getting thinner and wanting to go out wider as it does so. And the shape that you're trying to do dictates that it actually get narrower. The result is that you're likely to get a lot of extra puckering along this top edge. That's no big deal though, you can just smooth that out and it won't create any lasting effect. So this top edge, I do want to do a little bit of smoothing here, but I'm not going to overwork this. The walls of this are fairly thin at this stage. So again, I'm just looking to make sure that the form is the general shape that I'd like it to be later on so that I can do some refinement with it. Okay, so there is the conical shaped pinch pot. And the last one, I think you'll find to be a little bit easier simply because the clay tends to kind of want to go in that direction anyway. But for this one, we're going to make a wider shallow bowl or plate shape. One thing we're going to do here is rather than start with a ball, we're going to pat this down into more of a patty shape. And then, same deal, I'm holding it in my non-dominant hand and I'm going to push into the center with my dominant hand with the thumb, turning as I go until I have a fairly even and consistent hole in the center, and again it's bumping up that edge on the bottom as well, so you can kind of see that there. Then we're going to just work our way around the pot, pinching it out as we go. In this case, pinching fairly evenly, but a little bit more pressure, greater pressure from your inside thumb, and it's going to widen this out into a shallow bowl shape. If you were making a set of dishes from this, which you certainly could, you'd want to pay attention to the curve to try and keep that consistent so that they would stack nicely. Sometimes as people are doing these and you're getting into the clay that's maybe a little bit drier, the edges will tend to start to crack. Or if your pinching is taking a little bit longer than mine is, these edges may start to crack. The cracks that are forming here are really not problematic. They can just be smoothed out with a wet finger. If they were any deeper than this though, I would strongly recommend really blending them together, the two edges, and if that doesn't work, actually cut it open, score both sides, add some slip or water, and squeeze them back together. If you don't address larger cracks in the lip, particularly early on, they will often develop into bigger problems. Okay, in order to finish this bowl off, what I'm going to do is set it on the table again, and I'm going to create a base shape here. So this bowl's going to have a slightly flattened area in the bottom. And then from there, the lip can flare out. So at this point, I'm pinching with 2 hands, since I don't need to support the shape of the pot in my left hand. And I'm working together. You'll notice it is getting awfully wide. These were relatively the same amounts of clay, so it gives you some indication of how the clay is used for different shapes, whether it's going into height, width, or otherwise. All 4 of these rather are roughly the same wall thickness. I am trying to leave a little bit of extra thickness in the lip, or this edge of all of these pieces, that will allow me some flexibility later on to make some changes based on what the purpose of these pots becomes. It also will help them maintain their shape as they're drying. Okay, 4 basic pinch pot shapes. Some of these take a little bit more practice than others, but I'm sure you'll get the hang of it if you stick with it. And next time, I'll show you some directions that you can take these to create some interesting forms and other sculptural possibilities as well. I've sketched out some of the ideas that I think I might like to try to make next. They break down into 3 basic categories. I've been thinking about sort of scientific instruments, and a lot of this has to do with the time and place we're currently in, right? So the COVID-19 virus is on a lot of our minds. It's impacting all of our lives, certainly, and I'm thinking about all of the science that is going into trying to help us out of this crisis. And so I was thinking about making some of these objects from pinch forms, and then they would become vases, essentially. I've also been missing some of the social engagement that I normally have in my life, and so I was thinking about some hyper-social wares, especially during this time where we're meant to keep our social distance. So we've got a double bowl, a little tray here that's maybe meant for a party, another tray, and then this shape here is kind of a strange one. It's a handled cup that's meant for 2 people to drink at the same time. So this one's maybe a little less practical as far as a functional object, but I think has some metaphoric possibilities for our current time and place. And then lastly, as I'm in my outdoor studio looking at all the critters waking up to spring, I thought that I would show you how to make a couple of different animal shapes. So let me just take a red pencil here and break these forms down into simpler shapes. So I think that this double bowl is a fairly simple one. It's just going to be 2 pinch bowls that will join, and then 2 little ends here that will get attached to the sides. For this boiling flask, we've got a sphere here, but a sphere can be broken down into 2 pinch pots put together end to end, and then I will show you a special technique for creating a tube. For these animals, these are a little more complex. You can see on this one I've already started breaking that shape down a little bit. I've got a large pinch pot for the base, and then a longer tall pinch pot for the top half of the body, a pointed pinch pot for the head. The ears we're just going to make from kind of a pinch trough, and then the legs and tail we'll get into that in the specific video for those. But hopefully you can see that these shapes, although they're more complex than the basic forms that I've just shown you, are not going to be beyond reach by breaking them down into easier shapes. I'll also do a handle demo for a pinched handle when we get to the cups. You'll see the videos for the more advanced forms in separate links so that I can go into depth on each one. And then I'll close this out by showing you some finishing techniques as well.